The majority of our life is lived in liminal space.
And there's this in-between space, this liminal space.
This liminality that reveals possibility.
I think we're in a liminal moment, but also in a place of transformation.
I have great affection for the church and a troubled relationship with it.
Just to be alive in time means that we're on the threshold of the future.
That can't be the gospel, because God said to love our neighbors.
We don't know what the future looks like. We have to work it out together.
Well, hey, everybody. I am not interviewing someone today. We've had a couple of cancellations, some reschedulings. We got the holiday, and then kind of a family tragedy has hit, and in the extended family. So I thought I'd do something a little bit different. I've been trying to think through some things anyways about what we can do a little bit differently, and I'd like to take a break on the podcast. Not from posting videos, but I want to take a break from interviewing people. I've done a lot of interviews over the last 3 years, and it seems like I've learned a whole lot of stuff. You guys got to be like front row seat of my ongoing education. So what I'd like to do for the rest of the year is I don't want to take a break from like posting here or exploring my curiosities. Just take a break from interviewing folks. And then what I'd like to do is process what I have learned so far. And so the next few weeks, they're going to feel a little bit different. And I've got a few questions that I've fielded from some of you. If anybody wants to send in some of your questions about a scripture verse or anything going on in the world, anything theological, I'm going to be taking on some of your questions, kind of like an Ask Me Anything kind of a post, but I am not going to do it all by myself and be like a talking head. I do enough of that because I'm a pastor. What I'd like to do instead is to bring on some guests from the past that I've had a lot of fun with and created some good friendship with. And we're going to just kind of like take on your questions together, like the two of us. So I've asked a few people to do that, and they said yes. But for this week's podcast, I haven't done that yet. And I had some cancellations and all that stuff happen. So instead of having an empty week where there's nothing, this past Sunday, I did a sermon for Christ the King Sunday at my church. And it's based on Psalm 44. And I explain kind of the liturgical calendar and the reign of Christ Sunday and all that. So this is something a little bit different. I'm going to post the video here of me doing a sermon from my church, so you get a little peek at what I say. But this sermon's different because it kind of takes some of the ideas that I've been learning here on the podcast, and it kind of culminated it there. So it's a good start, I think, for the Q&A and the processing and all of that. I think it's going to be a good change in a little bit different direction for the rest of this year. So that's what it's going to look like, and that's what it's going to feel like for this week. It's a little different. And then next week, if we can kind of resolve some of the scheduling crazies, then we're going to have some folks on and answer some of your questions. So leave a comment down in wherever you're watching this, or if you're listening to this, you can go to a Facebook or YouTube page and leave a comment, and I'd be happy to take on any question you got and see what you got. So have a happy Thanksgiving, and enjoy this message on Psalm 46 for the reign of Christ Sunday, or Christ the King Sunday, the culmination of the entire liturgical year. And I'll catch you next week. Thanks. Well, this is the liturgical years. You can kind of think of today as New Year's Eve of the liturgical calendar. Lit up ball to kind of drop for you here, but we do celebrate this liturgical calendar. And today is the last Sunday of Ordinary Time, where we start a brand new year. It's not just a new thing called Advent, but there are 3 years in the liturgical cycle, year A, B, and C. And it starts with Advent, and then it runs all the way until the end of Ordinary Time, which is today. And then it starts year B, and then there's a cycle, and then a year C in the cycle, and then we go back to year A. And there's the same seasons in each year, but different readings for each one. And the cool part about the liturgical calendar is I can't clobber you over the head with things that I'm really passionate and bothered about. I am handed, these are your scriptures for today by somebody else, an entire tradition that was made 1,000 years before I was even born. And so I follow those things, and then I read them. I let them shape me. I don't let the news cycles shape what we're talking about on a Sunday. We have a liturgical year and cycle, and I try to communicate things that would be like right in line with what is, on your mind and heart for the time. But we're letting the liturgical cycle shape us and guide us. And there's been some Sundays where I'm looking at a scripture and I'm like, I don't want to do that one. Like, I am not excited about taking this one on. But then I'll dive into it and say, oh, that was really interesting. So it actually helps shape me as well. And Advent is next week. Start a whole new, it's like New Year's Day on the liturgical season. And that is a season that prepares us for Christmas. It used to be Lent. Like Advent used to be like a Lent. Everyone would fast and they would take all these people through an entire like catechism and then baptize them on the other side. And then it's kind of in our traditions now, it's more happy than Lent is. Lent is like, the desert wanderings and all that kind of stuff of Jesus. Lent is more like we're waiting for the arrival of Christ into our life. So here is the liturgical calendar that I like to use. This graphic here starts with Advent. We have Christmastide. So if you've ever heard that really irritating song, The 12 Days of Christmas, and wondered who in the right minds has 12 days of Christmas, one is enough. That's the liturgical calendar. There's 12 days of literal Christmastide. And it lasts 12 days until Epiphany. And Epiphany is kind of that season where we see the revelation of Christ. The wise men visiting the Christ child is one of those passages that we look at there. Then we have Lent, which is kind of preparing us for Easter, looking at the desert wanderings of Christ. Easter is not one Sunday, but 8 weeks long of a season. Easter is 8 weeks long. And it ends in May, usually May, sometimes June, with Pentecost. The final Sunday of Easter is Pentecost, where the giving of the Spirit is given to the church. Then we start the really long drudge through ordinary time, which lasts from, end of May, beginning of June, all the way until Advent. So if you will see, you are here. That's where you are right there. We're on the very end of ordinary time, and we're about to start Advent. And there's a new Sunday that was added to the liturgical cycle, fairly new, like within 100 years or so. And when you think that the liturgical calendar is probably a millennium old, 100 years is kind of new, so that's fairly new. Now, this guy here, he looks pretty serious, doesn't he? Like, I wouldn't really want to have a beer with that guy. Like, it's not a guy I would sit down and be like, yeah, let's chat. But he's an interesting guy. His name is Pope Pius XI. He looks very pious, doesn't he? Like, the glasses, I think, could do it for me. Like, those glasses there, I don't know what's going on. But he introduced a new Sunday on the church year. Now, this Pope here, he lived from 1857 to 1939. Anything interesting happened in that time frame? One of the major world wars happened at that time frame. And he was the Pope, his popedom. I don't know if that's the official word. I'm not Catholic, so I don't know. But his popedom lasted from 1922 to 1939 when he passed away. Now, if you understand, like World War I was right around that time frame. And that kind of was a big deal. A lot of people died. It was really bad. So he made a new Sunday on the church calendar called Christ the King Sunday in 1925. And the feast was in response to something that he saw going on in the world in the early 20th century. And this is straight from the Wikipedia page. It was rising secularism and nationalism and totalitarian authoritarian movements. He looked at everything that happened during World War I, and he said, we should probably do something about that in the church. And so what he did was he looked at this rising nationalism with governments and ideologies asserting human authority over like moral and spiritual matters. And he's like, let's take the authority back and put it in the church doors. And then he looked at kind of the fascism of Italy and Nazi Germany and all those other regimes there and how they were challenging the church's moral authority and the primacy of God in public life. And he decided we need a new church Sunday on the calendar. And he made this one. And he wanted to reaffirm Christ's sovereign authority over individuals, societies, and nations. And he emphasized Christ is king. And this is not something that's a political, earthly sense, but a spiritual, moral, cosmic thing. Something a little bit more mysterious, transcending the temporal powers. That is what he saw after the close of World War I and decided, let's introduce a new Sunday on the church calendar so we can combat that stuff in the world around us. And that was kind of, the feast was then created to remind us that Christians are loyal to Christ and that precede any loyalty to any earthly ideologies or empires or anything like that. Our primary identity is in Christ. So he made this thing called Christ the King Sunday. And it kind of moved around on the calendar where it's supposed to be and then finally landed for the very final Sunday of ordinary time, where it is, that would be today, Christ the King Sunday. And originally it was kind of on the last Sunday of October, just before All Saints Day, which we do All Saints Day here. We kind of light candles to remember those who have passed on. And it was the Sunday just before All Saints Day was going to be Christ the King. But after some reforms in Vatican II and all this stuff, he decided, let's move it to the last Sunday of the liturgical year right before Advent. It's a great way to just conclude the entire church year, the whole theological journey we've been on for an entire year. It concludes with Christ is King and has brought history to a close in his resurrection. And it's just, it kind of frames that liturgical year with that piece. It's kind of the closing piece and the curtains close and it's like the end of the show. Christ is King. That was great. And then next Sunday, we begin a brand new year and it's Advent and we're preparing for the arrival of Christ again. And so that's why we have Christ the King Sunday as the final Sunday of the liturgical calendar of the ordinary time. It was right there because a pope was like, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world. We should probably do some things theologically and organize our worship around some other things. And so I think it's still an important Sunday to recognize and to have for us. So today we're going to dive into Psalm 46. What does that have to do with the reign of Christ, the rule of Christ, and Christ's kingship over all of the cosmic creation? What does that have to do with that? That was the question for me, diving into it. This is a very common psalm. Like if you probably were a youth group in the 90s, maybe at a youth group, you probably bought for Mother's Day from Family Christian Bookstore a little coffee mug that said, "Be still and know that I am God." You're like, there we go. That is perfect, right? That's in this psalm. It's one of the more famous lines in this psalm. But I dove into it. I'm like, what does that actually mean? What is he saying? I found some really interesting things. So let's dive into it. The psalm communicates like the world is quaking. So this psalmist here, remember, the Psalms are the hymn books of the ancient people of Israel. They're the one, they would open it up and they would sing them. And so we don't read them, they would sing them. We lost all the music for them. We don't know what they are. But in one of these Psalms, I think today there was the word Selah in there. It's like sometimes you'll just see the word Selah in the middle of a Psalm. You're like, what is that? Chris asked me what it was. And I'm like, you know how in music you have that rest piece and everything kind of pauses for a minute? That's what that means. He's like, it literally means don't read this then. Like, yeah. Supposed to just kind of pause for a minute. It's a musical rest. So it's supposed to be sung, but we don't have the music for it, so we read them. But Christ is king when the world quakes around you is what this psalm is trying to communicate to us. So let's look at this. God is our refuge and strength and ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging. That there is very poetic. I hope you understand this is poetry. This is song. They're trying to, make a very big display. That's what art does. It kind of like art and poetry try to do this, where they're trying to give you like grand pictures of things. So here we see these mountains are falling into the heart of the sea. We see the water itself of the sea is like roaring and quaking and surging. So he's trying to say like the world around us is shaken. The world around us is quaking and we're not sure where we stand. Like what's more firm than mountains? Like they're huge, they're stable. You can't move a mountain, right? Like they're just stable. But all of a sudden these mountains are falling into the heart of the sea. And so it's not physically happening. You're not literally watching that happen, but there's this poetic element to there. But let's back up, because it says that God is our refuge and strength and ever-present help in trouble. Now, that's a really pretty phrase to say, right? But if you lived in these times, imagine hiking through this wilderness. We got any hikers in the house? We probably got a few hikers in the house. I know. We got some hikers in the house. How would you do if you had to take a 28-day journey across that? How would that sound? No cars, no air conditioning, no Holiday Inn Express. Like, you just gotta make your way through that. That's the actual wilderness of the Sinai Peninsula. So when they talk about the desert or the wilderness, they're not talking like, Alaskan forest or stuff like that. They're talking this. That's what that looks like. Now imagine you're there. The sun is beating down on your head and you might die. Like, these elements here, not many people live in places where the weather could kill you. Michigan's one of them, right around January, February. Yeah. That's the opposite problem here, though. I would want a warm refuge in January or February, right? There, they got the opposite problem. It's hot, it's arid, it's dry. And so any kind of refuge you can find on your journey, which is most likely going to be on foot, good Lord, that's going to be great. Any shade, any oasis, any streams, any valleys, any towns, any wells that are dug would provide a wonderful relief from the life-threatening elements of this wilderness. Now, David spent a lot of time running from King Saul in these wilderness right here. And so when he's writing these Psalms of there's a refuge here, there is an actual refuge he stumbled upon. Like, there's a picture of it. It's called En-Gedi. Now, how would you feel if you saw that in the middle of that? It's like, oh, good Lord. Yes, I'm going to jump right into that water, right? Like, there is the water is flowing. There's a little waterfall there. So you're sure the water is not stagnant. It doesn't have like nasty bacteria that's going to make you sick or something. You got flowing water. So it's hard for bacteria to grow in there. They called those living waters. And so you stumble upon this in the middle of that and you're like, oh man, I'm not going to die today. This is great. So when it says that God is our refuge, a very present help in trouble, like, imagine that. That's what David is picturing in his mind. He's walking through the wilderness, not sure where his next glass of water is going to come from. And he stumbles upon this oasis called the En-Gedi. And he's like, wow. And he says, God's like that. Like, that is what this is what God is like. I'm walking through the arid, dry wilderness that could kill me, but then I stumbled upon this place and I can take a rest. I can refresh. I can get some water. I can cool off. I can not die today, right? So the psalmist is poetically comparing God to this life-saving refuge right here. Like, that would just be one. So that's the image in our mind. When we think of a refuge, like, we don't really have a lot that we're running from. We don't have, like, in our country, we're fairly safe. We're one of the most secure, safe places. Like, I don't feel like my life is threatened when I go outside, whether by elements or war or whatever. We have enough food. I got me a car. Sure, the heat doesn't work on the floor, but I got heated socks coming today. I got 304,000 miles on my car. I am not investing in the heat system. I'd rather buy heated socks. So, it's like, we don't really have that life-threatening place unless you just get lost out in the cold in January or something. But then stumbling upon a refuge, we don't know the experience of walking through that wilderness and then coming upon this and saying, my goodness, this must be what God is like. So this experience here comes out of in a song, like, though my world is shaking and falling apart and I'm not sure, like, the mountains I thought were the most stable thing in the world, and now those are falling in the ocean. Like, my world is shaking. The experience of God in the midst of the world shaking thing is like this oasis here somehow. How does that happen? Like, I'm sure you had your world shaken up. And then you're thinking to yourself, well, God is my refuge. Okay, how? Like, how does that actually work? How does God become a refuge to you when your world's shaking? Most of us, like, live in our heads. Like we have ideas about God and then we try to comfort ourselves with our ideas about God. Are you catching this? Like God is a refuge. That's an idea I have. So my world is trembling and quaking. So if I just say that idea enough, I'll believe it and then I'll be okay. And that's not how David experienced God at all. It wasn't an idea. He's like, I have found God in the Engedi. Like, here he is. So when the world is falling apart, the psalmist doesn't ignore the troubles of life in this thing. Like, no, mountains are quaking. They're falling into the sea. Everything's giving way. And it is crazy. It's a lot of times we try to deny the troubles around us to make ourselves feel better. And there's a phrase called spiritual bypassing that we are very good at as Christians. Whereas the world's quaking around us and everything's shaking and or everything's full. And then instead of acknowledge the reality of the difficulty of things, we try to cliche it away with a happy, positive phrase. That probably is true in an idea form, but it doesn't take on the reality of this moment and how hard it is. You ever encounter that? You're like, I would like to believe that God is a refuge. I would like to believe that God is help in trouble. But at the same time, I got all this stuff going on. How is it going to actually work? And no matter how much your brain tells your body that God is your refuge and you are safe and everything's okay, your body does not hear that. Nervous systems do what they're going to do, right? Y'all have a nervous system? Is it nervous? Yeah, they call it nervous system for a reason. Like, our nervous systems are on overload these days and everything is like, and it doesn't matter the ideas you have in your head, your nervous system will not listen to your brain because it doesn't have a brain consciousness to it. It's its own thing. It's disconnected from that. It's like, I'm not going to listen to your ideas in your head. I am looking for the threats out there and I'm trying to keep us safe. And so our nervous systems get into fight or flight modes when they get really amplified. And you've heard that, fight, flight, or freeze. Those are the things. When your nervous system reaches its maximum, you are done with what you can handle. You will either fight the threat in front of you, you will run away from the threat in front of you, or you will freeze and get devoured. That is something that's just been evolutionarily put into our nervous system. Kept us safe from cougars and lions and saber-toothed tigers, I guess. But we don't have those things anymore. We don't have lions after us today. But this psalm is not an idea that we're supposed to put in our heads that if we just tell ourselves often enough, our nervous system will calm down. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't matter your ideas in your head about God. Your nervous system doesn't care about that. So the experience of God is not the experience of an idea you have about God in your mind that you try to regulate your nervous system with. It doesn't work that way. You have to embody the trust that you're thinking about. So the idea is important. Ideas are important. They have to be in your brain. They're good to have ideas. Bad ideas cause lots of bad trouble in the world. You have to have good ideas. They're just not good enough to get you through. So you have to regulate your nervous system with your body. And that's where we talk about the word becomes flesh. That's what John said about Jesus. This idea, the logos, the idea that God is out there, becomes flesh in the person of Christ. God embodies himself in this world. And then we take that enfleshment idea and turn it back into an idea. Or fleshment body, put it back into an idea. God is a refuge. God is a refuge. Okay, everything's crazy, but God is a refuge. I should be fine. Why am I not fine? Am I making sense yet? All right. That there is your nervous system disconnected from your brain, and it needs something else. God is found in not just the ideas we have about God, but in the experiences that soothe your soul. A walk in the woods. Sometimes you're just a little bit stressed and overwhelmed with life. It's time to go for a walk. Put down the little stress box that we carry in our pockets all the time that tell us that the world is ending. Put them down and go for a walk. God is found not just in the ideas, God is a refuge, God is a refuge, God is a refuge. Why am I freaking out? God is found in the experiences that soothe your soul, like a walk in the woods, a time out with friends, a hot shower, a comedy that makes you laugh. The things that calm your body down are experiences of God also, not just the ideas we have about God. And God is found in the experiences that ground you also, not just the experiences that soothe you, but the experiences that ground you. A moment of quiet prayer, a session of meditation, seeing a counselor or a therapist, attending a worship service. Those are things that ground and center us back in this reality that Christ is king of the whole cosmos. And then we go back out and, the world tells us other things. Oh, the mountains are shaking and everything's going wrong, right? Fear is absolutely real. Anxiety is real. This psalm validates those experiences, but also gives you a pathway through it. That's what we're missing in a lot of Western religion. As we've made everything into an idea that we're supposed to agree with, but we have no pathway with which to walk on to then embody those ideas in the world. And that's a very Western thing. It's not found in the Bible. The Bible is like, do these things and you will experience this stuff. That's what the Bible says, a lot of that, right? And so if we want to deal with our fear and anxiety when the world is quaking around us, we don't just have to tell ourselves ideas about God. We have to encounter God in the experiences that soothe us, regulate us, and ground us back in this world, back in our bodies, back in the present moment. That's why we light a candle. The candle says God is here. And our minds tell us, yeah, but what about, this week coming up? We got to prepare for Thanksgiving and cook this and travel there. And we're going to see so-and-so at the party. And then we're going to have to talk about this. And that's going to be awkward. And our brain leaves the present moment, jumps into the future and starts worrying about what's not yet here. And you know what? God will be there too, but God is here. And so we can stay here and we can prep for then by staying in the here and in the now. And so when everything shakes, trust actually can become a revolution. Because trust isn't just an idea in agreeing that God is a refuge. Trust is finding God in the actual refuges that ground us and soothe us and give our nervous systems a break from the craziness of this world. I like what Katie Cannon said. Our faith is made real in the tension of survival, resistance, and hope. Not in the ideas that we have about God. Those are great. Have your ideas. But if they don't work in the way that you live your life, then you're living in your head and they're never going to get back on the ground. You're never going to make connection of faith with life. It'll always just be this idea in our heads. And it has to be better than that. We have to have a pathway to walk on. That's why they called Christians followers of the way back in the book of Acts. Like, oh yeah, they lived that way that Jesus taught them to live. Jesus didn't say, here's a whole bunch of information you need to cram in your skull about what's true about God. Now go and teach everyone else to agree with you about those things. He said, teach them to do the things I've commanded you to do. He's like, I showed you this pathway. I lived it out in front of you. I embodied it for you to see here. Now go and teach others how to embody this also. It's more than an idea. We need to believe that because this psalm then talks about this steady river. It says, there is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, a holy place where the Most High dwells. God is within her. Talking about Jerusalem. That was their capital city where the temple was and all that stuff. So it talks about how there's nations are in uproar and kingdoms are falling and all this stuff is going on. But there's this river at the heart of the city. Why would they use this image of the river? Now, here's a map of modern day Egypt. What does this have to do with Jerusalem? Here, we'll see in a minute. Notice the straight lines, 90-degree angle down at the bottom corner. Overall, kind of a box shape, right? It almost looks like Wyoming, except this little, it's a little bit wiggly over there. But that's modern day Egypt. It's kind of like very, very straight. Here's ancient Egypt. A little bit different shaped, isn't it? What is that shaped around? Anybody see a blue thing? Is there, as they said, denial is not just a river in Egypt. I can't remember who said that. Was that Stuart Smalley from SNL? Probably. All right. They had to, in the desert, be around water. So the Egyptians built their entire large nation right along the riverbanks all the way down. That's just how it worked in the ancient days. You had to stay near water or you would die. You had to dig a well, but a civilization that was the largest and most powerful in the early ancient Egypt world, like that had to be around the Nile River because you got to have your crops, you got to have your livestock fed, that had to be a river. So this river became known as a source of stability, a source of life, a source of food, a source of, this is how we stay alive, is we need to be around water, have to be close to water. And so the symbol of the river going through Jerusalem is this image of God is like this river. The original Garden of Eden story back in Genesis had like 4 rivers in it. It's like all these rivers are, coming here. So notice the experience of God for this psalmist is not an idea, but a physical thing in the physical world, a refuge, a river. God is a sense of strength in the midst of trouble, like an experience of help when needed. God's not merely an idea in the psalmist's head, but God is like this river running through it that keeps us alive. And God is more than this idea of, oh yeah, he's a refuge and a help, right? God is the river of life in the middle of our chaos is what the psalmist is trying to say. God is with the psalmist, not in some invisible idea as an invisible man in the sky that sometimes comes in and intervenes and makes your world okay, but most of the time doesn't. And you're like, why? What's going on, right? And then we just theologically cliche that away, and then we deny the reality of our experience. God is not this invisible idea. God is woven through the fabric of your reality. And if you can get out of your own head yelling at you about it, how you're not good enough or smart enough, or gosh darn it, people do like you. I'm on an SNL kick today. Sorry about that. You can find this still place. Like sometimes you need lots of help to find it, but once you know the pathway to the place, the still place in your soul, you can follow it whenever you have need. That's what this psalmist is saying. I know how to calm down my nervous system when it's overworked. And it's not merely thinking thoughts about God, but I actually have a pathway and practice. And if we could understand that we are not what others say about us, we are not what others think about us, and we are not what we can produce or lack of production, our whole identity is based on a PR show that we're running in our head, and our brain is yelling at us about how our PR show is not the greatest thing in the world, and really you're just a loser. And if everyone really knew how you really were, good Lord, look out. Everybody's brain does that. Everybody's brain does that, and we have to find the still places in our soul that gets beyond all the self-chatter in our minds about how we're not all that great. We have to untie our sense of self from all these things on the outside of us, and then like bring it back into this still place where God says, you're enough. You are human, you are valuable, you are loved. But if we constantly tie our identity and our value as a human person onto other people's opinions of us or other people's ideas of us, and we're constantly running the PR show, then it's like Alan Watts said, it's like hanging your identity from a wind chime, and any gust of wind is going to set it off and make a lot of noise in your soul. And you need to find those still places because God is woven through the fabric of your very reality. It's not somewhere far off where you can't find or understand or know. Like God is here in the midst of your reality. When you experience those experiences that calm you down, that center you, that ground you, you have experienced God. When you have an experience of great love, you have an experience of God. When you are in the midst of great suffering and you find the strength to just take one more step, you have found the experience of God. It is not an idea. It is an embodiment of a way of living in the present world. And yes, there are some ideas that help us along the way, but it does not primarily operate inside of our skulls. I like what one of the best thinkers out there today, Ilia Delio, she's a scientist and a nun in the Franciscan order. She's amazing. She says, divine life flows like a river at the heart of the universe. Like God's life is flowing through the entire universe and moving and shaping all of creation in its evolution towards wherever we're going. God is actively at work in all of our lives, in all of creation. But then this last part is the most well-known part of the psalm. Be still and know that I am God, right? Maybe some of you have a coffee cup with that saying on it. Someone gave you as a gift or whatever. What's this actually talking about, though? Here's the passage here. Come and see what the Lord has done, the desolations he has brought on the earth. That's a great line. He makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bows and shatters the spear. He burns the shields with fire. And then he says, be still and know that I am God. Now, I didn't put that first phrase on that Mother's Day card I got my mom back in the 90s. Come see the desolations the Lord has brought to the earth. That was not on that Mother's Day card. I can tell you that much. But what is he actually talking about? This Hebrew word here is great. Be still and know that I am God. So there's a story in Samuel where the King Saul he was the first king, but he was not a great king at all. And there was a clear command from God, do this, don't do this. It was like it was a war command. I don't like to talk about the war stuff very much, but he's like, kill everybody, even the animals. And what he did was he took all the animals and he's like, hey, we keep these. And so the prophet Samuel comes in and Saul was like, hey, check it out. We won and I kept all the animals. And Samuel then looks at Saul and interrupts him and says the words, be still. Now, I can assure you he was probably pretty angry when he saw what was going on. So the word be still could be translated, shut up. So if you ever got this for your, as a Mother's Day card or something, your kids told you to shut up. Hey, shut up and know that God is God, would you? So it's actually like a harsh phrase. Like, it's not just be still and calm and no, it's like, shush. Michael Jordan, I think, said it best when he said, stop it, get some help. Like, this is what, if you remember that 80s commercial. In a tribal war culture during the Iron Age, God was seen as the one who stops the wars and conflicts that brought so much suffering into existence. God is pictured poetically swooping in, breaking the weapons of warring humans, burning the shields, and making war stop. And he uses the phrase, cut it out. You guys aren't God. I am God. Stop it. That's what he's saying. So it's not this like, oh, be still and glorious and wonderful. You can get there eventually, but yes, but the original translated is going to be more like, shush, shut up, stop it. Stop making war. Stop killing people. Stop being so violent. Stop being so, dominating. It's like God is coming in and saying, no, you're not God. I'm God. So that's this psalm. God's arrival brings wars to a close. Now, we're not experiencing a lot of war, like violence. There's nobody here is in threat of being shot on your way home or something like that. But we have a war inside of us. We have this war between the person that tells us, like, hey, you're not a very good person and you ought to be doing a lot better than you are. And then that person that's like, but I am loved and accepted by God. Those two things are at war within us. And the one that we feed is the one that's going to grow and get bigger. And this psalmist is reminding us that we don't have to fill the wars inside of our own soul to become victorious on the other side. No, God's arrival brings a war to close. God's arrival brings violent structures down, systems of domination, frantic humans striving to climb the ladders of power. All of that comes to a cease in this psalm with just the two words that God utters, be still. You ain't God. Christ's reign stills our fear and invites us to the river. And we can rearrange our allegiances when we become Christians so that we're no longer identified with all these power games that are going on for all of human history. You have been in the presence of somebody whose stillness spoke loudly. Have you ever been there? Their stillness, they're quiet, there's gosh, they're just speaking so many words without us saying anything at all. Mr. Rogers is one for me. You watch Mr. Rogers, he is a very quiet man. He's a very still man. And yet, so much power behind the words he does choose to use. I like what poet Rumi said, silence is the language of God. All else is poor translation. Get comfortable with some quiet. All right, I got a couple of reflection questions for you to think about this week and a spiritual practice for you to try. Where do you feel the mountains shaking in your own life right now? How is God calling you to be still, not as a passivity, but as trust? And what does Christ's reign look like in a world deeply divided and anxious? Now, here's a spiritual practice. Identify one pattern of fear, control, or reactivity and consciously lay it down in prayer as an act of joining God who breaks the bow and shatters the spears of our violent ways. Try it out. this week. It'll be on our social media page. If you forget the questions or whatever, it'll be on there. So follow our social media page for that. Now, since we used the psalm for the message, I've been using poetry from my friend Paul down in Alabama, who writes some really good poetry. So this will be our last poem. And this one is called Still Here by P.A. Jones, or better known as Paul, my friend. The porch light swings in the evening wind, and I realized the world didn't stop. It just kept moving while I held my breath, waiting for something to change. The fence is crooked, the paint is peeling. The creek has shifted its course, but it is still running, and so am I. I sit in the quiet, hands on my knees, watching the shadows lengthen, counting the small mercies that come without fanfare. God is still here, I think, though he doesn't speak. He shows up in the rhythm of the rain, in the stubborn green of the grass, in the way the world keeps offering itself, even when we feel empty. I am still here, scarred, slow, a little harder to trust, but still here. And that is enough. Amen.